So I'm not going to take too much of your time because I want to have you enjoy Ben Crystal, and we're so delighted to be working with him tonight. He's a well-known writer, actor, producer, and he's got many, many TV and film credits to his name, and including all of his Shakespeare activity. And I had a look at his website tonight, and apparently he has about 18 different accents. So I wonder which one he's going to bring to you tonight. So Ben has got some special guests, and I'll leave him to introduce them to you. So without further ado, can I introduce Ben Crystal and his guests? Thank you. You're okay.
Yeah, I'll take that. Hello. Now I've got to do something I'm not particularly well skilled at. No, I am going to need that. I'm going to need that. Give me my microphone. Okay, hang on. Way. Hello. Hello. See, now I've done this, I'm going to turn it off. And hello, those of you out there. I suppose I should say good evening, or to some of you possibly good morning. Particularly a hello to some colleagues in Luxembourg, another in Holland, in Amsterdam, and hopefully a friend in New York too. Thank you all for coming this evening. I'm a very lucky man. I've spent the last 10 years or so running around the world talking about Shakespeare, writing about Shakespeare, performing Shakespeare. And what I would like to do this evening for the next hour or so before some questions is take you through some of the discoveries I've made. The first and foremost was blindingly obvious once someone showed it to me. That Shakespeare's plays were written to be performed. That they are not books to be read or indeed studied, but they are manuals on how to perform his plays, these great works of theatre, now so-called great works of literature. And I didn't realize this until, it was almost too late. I didn't realize this until I started acting him, which was a couple of years after I started studying him. When I started studying him, it was in a book on the page. It was Macbeth. And a couple of years later, I was given King Lear. And about the time I was given King Lear, I was told about the way that Shakespeare wrote, that he wrote in a particular type of poetry, and this particular type of poetry was called iambic pentameter. And I put my hand up to my teacher and I said, excuse me, miss, what is this iambic pentameter? And she said, well, it's a line of poetry and it has a particular rhythm to it. And it goes, de-dum, 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 de-dum. And I said, well, that's great. Is there iambic trimeter? And she went, yes. And I said, well, is there iambic duometer? And she went, shut up, Ben. As did the rest of my schoolmates. 6 months later, having thoroughly gotten to the point where I hated Shakespeare, I found myself running around a stage, an amphitheatre, a stone amphitheatre, playing Ariel in The Tempest. It was in North Wales where I grew up, so that's one of the 18 accents. I was wearing 2 pieces of silk and a piece of string, and I was covered in gold makeup. And all of a sudden, to take the biblical reference, I had a road to Damascus moment. And the light shone down on me, as it were, the Shakespearean light, if you will, because for the first time, Shakespeare made sense. Standing on stage in front of an audience and acting out loud in a way that it had never done so before. I did not know until I started acting it that yes, iambic pentameter, the style of poetry that Shakespeare and many others wrote in, is a line of poetry that has a particular rhythm to it, and that rhythm is a de-dum, 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 de-dum rhythm. But I did not know that one line of iambic pentameter naturally fills the human lungs. That this rhythm is a rhythm that we carry with us every single day of our lives. that it's a rhythm that we still hear today. I went to town to buy a coat today. I went to town to buy a coat today. I went to town to buy a coat today. Da-dum, 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 da-dum. It's not just the heartbeat of us, it's the heartbeat of modern English as it was the heartbeat of early modern English. Not all forms of modern spoken English, of course, different from French English. I went to town to buy a coat today. Da, 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 da. Has a different rhythm underlying it. This is when I need to turn on the technology. One of the greatest examples I always come to in Shakespeare of him writing in this rhythm. Sonnet 18. One of the most regular of the 154 sonnets that he wrote. Starts with the question. And by the way, I'll always talk when I teach or when I run acting workshops. I talk about thoughts rather than sentences. We write in sentences, we speak and think in thoughts. And the first thought is a question. And the poet, the lover, asks, "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day?" And, as you'll notice, the rest of the poem is an answer to that question, an unanswered answer, if you will, because there is no full stop in this early version of the sonnets from 1609. Let me read it to you. "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short a date. Sometime too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often is his gold complexion dimmed. And every fair from fair sometime declines by chance on nature's changing course untrimmed. But thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of that fair thou owest. Nor shall death brag thou wanderest in his shade, when in eternal lines to time thou growest. So long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee." It's a beautiful little poem. It's an English sonnet, so there's 14 lines. And these 14 lines have 10 beats in them. "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day?" It's in iambic pentameter, and we know it's in poetry partly because it's in this nice little box shape, and there's capital letters at the beginning of every line. And because it's a classic English or Shakespearean sonnet, we've got a lovely A-B, A-B, C-D, C-D rhyme scheme. Day, May, temperate, dut, shines, declines, dimmed, if it were there, untrimmed, fade, shade, oast, grost, and then a rhyming couplet at the end, C and D. And the thing about the iambic pentameter, about this de-dum rhythm, is that it gives you a clue, an acting note. Some people will read this poem and say, "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day?" And they're going against the natural rhythm that Shakespeare wrote in. It's not "shall I." I can't decide whether I will or not. No. The iambic rhythm, the de-dum rhythm, is pushing you towards the I. Shall I compare thee? Not her, but thee. And not you either, eh? Shakespeare had that dissimilation too. Tu and vous as in French, the formal and informal versions of you. Same as Shakespeare's time. Thee is the informal version of you. So he's being very intimate, very tender with the person that he's talking to. And fair enough, because he's asking her, let's say it's a her, could be a him. He's asking her, "Shall I compare thee? Shall I compare thee to a summer's day?" And the natural rhythm is pushing you away from the less important syllables. And then, as I said, the rest of that beautiful poem is an answer. And he goes, "Well, you know what? I'm not going to compare you to a summer's day, because you know what? Summers are really hot, and it rains, and you sit and you're in the field with a picnic, and then there are ants all over it. You know what? Summer's just, it's not good enough. And actually, you're more beautiful than summer. In fact, you're so beautiful that I'm going to write your beauty into a poem. And this poem is going to live beyond your lifetime and beyond my lifetime. In fact, this poem is going to live forever. It's going to live as long as men can breathe or eyes can see. And so long lives this poem, and this will give life to your beauty. I want someone to write that about me. Or at least say it to me, that'd be nice.
We'll do it, Ben.
No heckling from the front row. And just so we're absolutely clear, someone once said to me, you know, how can you tell the difference between poetry and prose? And prose is just the sort of unstructured version of theatrical writing that Shakespeare gives. And I said that poetry starts with a capitalized letter at the beginning of every line, and it looks kind of columny. It's a nice bit of prose for Much Ado About Nothing. And as a wit recently said to me, prose is the one that goes to the end of the page. And doesn't indeed have a capitalized word at the beginning. Why, if faith methinks she's too low for a high praise, too brown for a fair praise, and too little for a great praise, only this commendation I can afford her, that were she other than she is, she were unhandsome and being no other, but as she is, I do not like her. Benedict from Much Ado About Nothing. And no real structure there, and not a great amount of direction from our Shakespeare. I'm now going to ask two actors that I work with a lot in my Passion and Practice ensemble to come up. Aslam and Jenny, can you join us? Give them a little round of applause. Not a big one yet. Oh, okay, look, there's the nice, I always like centering sonnets. They are very pretty. And look, declined back in, or dimmed back in place. Good. So they're just going to read a little bit of Romeo and Juliet for us, one of the early Shakespeare plays.
Yeah, sure. If I profane with my unworthiest hand this holy shrine, the gentle sin is this. My lips, two blushing pilgrims, did ready stand to smooth that rough touch with a tender kiss.
Good pilgrim, you do wrong your hands too much, which mannerly devotion shows in this, for saints have hands that pilgrims' hands do touch, and palm to palm is holy palmer's kiss.
Have not saints lips, and holy palmers too?
Aye, pilgrim, lips that they must use in prayer.
Oh, then, dear saint, let lips do what hands do. They pray, grant thou, lest faith turn to despair.
Saints do not move, though grant for prayer's sake.
Then move not while my prayer's effect I take. Thus from my lips, by thine, my sin is purged.
Then have my lips the sin that they have took.
Sin from my lips? Oh, trespass sweetly urge, give me my sin again.
You kiss by the book.
Very well done. So this is Romeo and Juliet's first meeting. And in fact, when Romeo and Juliet first meet, they meet at a dance. Do they not? And Juliet has just finished dancing with Paris, probably Paris. And as she curtsies and he bows, her hands go back. And Romeo grabs her by the hand. And he's not supposed to, of course, because this is Elizabethan times and you're not supposed to touch. And he apologizes immediately and says, if I profane with this my unworthiest hand, this holy shrine, the gentle sin is this. Now he's turning Juliet into a statue, I suppose, into sort of like a saintly statue. And he says, my lips, two blushing pilgrims, did ready stand to smooth that rough touch with a tender kiss. So he's turning her into a statue of a saint and him into a pilgrim. She picks up the play and says, good pilgrim, you're doing your hand too much disservice, which you're showing me in the way that you're talking so nicely to me, your manners. And anyway, saints have hands that pilgrims' hands do touch, because, you know, I suppose pilgrims come to statues of saints and they kiss their hands, right? And anyway, she says, palm to palm is holy palmer's kiss. Now, I mean, there's a couple of meanings here. One is that, I suppose pilgrims pray to saints, but also, in the way that Elizabethans danced back in the day, they are at a dance after all, you guys can do it, they would dance palm to palm, not touching. And they would walk around, keeping nice eye contact, and it's all very sexy, yeah, that's good. Good, thank you, go on. And so she says, we're at a dance, we can dance, palm to palm is holy palmer's kiss. He tries again though, he still wants that kiss. Have not saints lips as well as palms and holy palmers too? And she says, yeah, pilgrim, lips that they've got to use in prayer. Stop trying to snog me, this is public. Oh, then, dear saint, let lips do what hands do. They pray, they come together. Grant thou, lest faith turn to despair. Please, I'm getting desperate. Typical boy. Then Juliet says, well, saints don't move. If I'm a saint, if I'm a statue of a saint, saints don't move. Though grant for prayers' sake, the coquette. Then he takes his chance, then move not while my prayers effect I take. He takes his opportunity and kisses her. And then tells her, playing this sin line, thus from my lips, by thine my sin is purged. But then Juliet goes, oh, but now I've got your sin all over my lips. Then have my lips the sin that they have took. He says, oh, sin from my lips, oh, trespass, sweetly urged. Give me my sin again. And she says, you kissed by the book. So they kiss again. And then whether you kiss by the book can mean you kiss very nicely. Thanks for not slipping me the tongue. You know, it can mean whatever you want it to mean, I suppose. You kiss very politely. I'm not, you know. So that's what they're saying. But how are they saying it? Well, first of all, we know they're saying it in poetry. There's capitalized words at the beginning. If I profane with my unworthiest hand. Yeah, 10 syllables. It's written in iambic pentameter. Think about that for a minute. This is their first meeting. You walk into a bar. You see a beautiful girl. You walk up to her and you go, all right, darling, fancy a snog? Chances are you're going to get a drink thrown in your face. You walk up to a girl in a bar. Such is her beauty. Such is the amazing quality that she strikes in you and that you seem to find yourself flooding out of yourself, that when you speak to her, you start speaking to her in poetry. You're probably not going to get a drink thrown over you. She'll probably listen. Juliet replies in poetry. So, to a bystander listening, two people, one starts talking in poetry, the other starts talking back to him in poetry. They're getting on. We can tell, just from the writing style, the dynamic between these two characters, because if they weren't getting on, Juliet could give Juliet's prose to speak. And they carry on speaking in poetry, but they're not just speaking in poetry, are they? They're speaking in rhyming poetry. Hand stand, this kiss. Much touch, this kiss. To do, prayer to spare, sake take. A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, E, F, G, G. A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, E, F, G, G. Such is the beauty, such is the wonder of this meeting that Shakespeare doesn't give them prose to speak to each other. He doesn't give them poetry to speak to each other. He doesn't even give them rhyming poetry to speak to each other. They share a sonnet. The only level up from that in terms of the hierarchy of speech in the way that Shakespeare had to communicate with his characters is song. Gotta sing, you know. Imagine for a moment, you walk into a bar. Such is the beauty of the person opposite you that you find yourself speaking in poetry, in rhyming poetry. They seem to be into you, and they start speaking in rhyming poetry back. It's one of the most wonderful encounters I've ever read or ever seen. Imagine telling your grandkids, hey, Granddad, how did you and Grandma meet? Well, it was embarrassing, actually, because we did a couple of tequilas, and then, I don't really remember. Well, it was funny, actually. I walked into this place, and she was so beautiful that I walked up to her, and I suddenly found myself talking in rhyming poetry to her. And then she did the same. And then at the end, just before we kissed for the very first time, we realized that we'd shared a sonnet. Not content with that, purged, urged, took book. They start another sonnet. And look at how beautiful it becomes. Thus from my lips, by thine my sin is purged, then have my lips the sin that they have took. Sin from my lips, O trespass sweetly urged. Give me my sin again, you kiss by the book. Give me my sin again, you kiss by the book. Now, is that elision? removing a syllable, it makes it make 10. They're not just sharing a sonnet anymore. They're sharing lines of poetry. They're finishing each other's sentences. And they met 50 seconds ago. So, in order to read it right and well, as you guys, you read those last couple of lines again, as Shakespeare intended.
Thus from my lips, by thine my sin is purged.
Then have my lips the sin that they have took.
Sin from my lips. O trespass sweetly urged, give me my sin again.
You kissed by the book.
Good, and actually it's probably going to have to be a bit faster, so go from O trespass.
O trespass sweetly urged, give me my sin again.
You kissed by the book.
Good, and the last time I gave this a workshop on this scene, a 14-year-old went, but how can they kiss? They've only got, like, give me my sin again, you kissed by the book. But if you guys, like, have just kissed, so come close, 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 close. And notice how we've got thus from my lips, then have my lips, sin from my lips. And it's almost like they're kind of just whispering against each other's cheeks, right? Mm. You could absolutely kiss in the half-breath duck down.
Sorry.
Yeah.
There you go. There you go. This is an unusual. Okay, now this is getting into something else. We're going to move on.
Let's just exit.
But what's interesting, and this, as I say, is an earlier play, that not only is he experimenting with the sonnet form that he wrote a lot of while the theatres were closed in 92 to 94, he's experimenting here with breaking up the poetic form and directing his actors even further, because in order to keep a reverence to the form, those 10 beats shared, the actors have to come in on cue. 15 years later, this is the Macbeth. Shakespeare's been working with the same group of actors all this time. I think I can turn this off now for a second. Shakespeare's been working with the same group of actors the whole time. The audience has been listening to this rhythm. And this is when he took Marlowe's idea and shoved it into the next world theatrically. And it was Marlowe's idea, by the way. Right, Shakespeare before Shakespeare, Marlowe was Shakespeare before Shakespeare. And Marlowe hit upon the idea of using this style of poetry to give his characters more natural sounding speech, even in its heightened state. It was Shakespeare, though, that realized that if he broke that rhythm, he might be able to replicate the natural non-fluency that all humans have, while still keeping their speech heightened. I'm going to get Aslam and Jenny to read 10 lines from Macbeth. This is just after Macbeth has killed Duncan in his castle. Take the sentence.
Yeah. I have done the deed. Didst thou not hear a noise?
I heard the owls scream and the crickets cry. Did you not speak?
When?
Now.
As I descended?
I.
Hark. Who lies i'th second chamber?
Donalbain.
This is a sorry sight.
Foolish thought to say a sorry sight.
Very good, very good. So 10 lines. No, you're not going anywhere yet. As I say, Macbeth has just come back from killing the king, Duncan, in their house. It's quiet, it's late. The first thing that you say to her is,
I've done the deed.
I have done the deed. I have done the deed. It's 5 syllables. There should be 10. By this point, Shakespeare's actors realized that if there was a line of poetry that was less than 10 syllables, Shakespeare was giving them opportunity to act. He was giving them, if you sort of imagine a modern sort of soap opera, and the character goes, Frank, I'm pregnant. And Frank gets an opportunity to go. That's basically what Shakespeare was doing. So, Macbeth comes on. Lady Macbeth has been waiting for him. She's had to convince him to do the deed in a scene previous. So this is what he's about to say is new news. He might come down and say, I have not done the deed. That would be a different play.
Yeah.
So I have done the deed is 5, so which means you can come on, tell her you've done the deed, and then you have a pause of 5. In which you fill with context-relevant acting. What would context-relevant acting be in this case? Bearing in mind what you're about to say to her, didst thou not hear a noise? Bearing in mind you're in your castle, it's late, you're hoping that no one has woken up whilst you have killed God in your house.
Could be
Listening acting is good. It's a good choice. So come in, tell her you've done the deed, do some listening acting, and then ask her the next thing.
Okay. I have done the deed. Didst thou not hear a noise?
I heard the owl scream and the crickets
Good.
cry.
I'm going to stop you there. Now, the great thing about that, of course, is he says, I have done the deed, and whilst he pauses, our eyes flick to see what she thinks about this. So it's not just a reaction shot for him, it's a reaction shot for her too. Didst thou not hear a noise is 6, which means you have a nice little pause of 4.
Yeah.
Why on earth would Shakespeare give Lady Macbeth a pause before she answers the question? He says, did you hear anything? She then says, I heard the owl scream and the crickets cry. When in life do we need a pause before we answer a question? When we don't know the answer. She has to remember, because she wasn't expecting him to come down from killing God and then say, did you hear anything? That makes sense to me. Have a think, then answer him.
I have done the deed. Didst thou not hear a noise?
I heard the owl scream and the crickets cry. Did you not speak?
When?
Now,
As I descended.
I...
Good. And now, after I heard the owl scream and the crickets cry, the sound of an owl screaming was a harbinger of doom to the Elizabethans. The sound of a cricket crying, crick, crick, crick. The sound of a cricket crying. Nice little bit of poetry. Thank you, Bill. Now, did not you speak when, now, as I descended? Is 10. It's 11 really, but because they spoke a lot faster, I'll come to that later. You can make it make 10, which means, like we learned from Romeo and Juliet, it's got to be, did not you speak when, now as I descended, I.
Okay.
From the top?
Go from I heard the owl scream and the crickets cry.
I heard the owl scream and the crickets cry. Did you not speak?
When?
Now.
As I descended?
I...
Hark!
Good. And it's got to be that fast. It has to be, because it's written in this poetry. And then after that, we have a nice pause as she says, yes, which is 1, which means they have to pause for 9. And then he says, hark, because he thinks he hears something, which is 1. And then they have to pause for 9 more. That's a lot of stage time. Actors get nervous and they rush it. Trust me, you earn the pauses and take them. Immediately after that one where you think you hear something, and you think you hear something, I'm guessing, from the second bedroom, because the next thing you ask is,
Who lies in the second chamber?
who lies in the bedroom next to Duncan, the second chamber, the second best bedroom, and she says,
Donalbain.
Donalbain. Who lies in second chamber, Donalbain, is 10. So you don't have a pause this time, which means you come in immediately on cue. Why do you come in immediately on cue? Because you know the answer.
Yeah.
Why do you know the answer?
Because I'm paranoid.
And it's your house,
Yeah.
and you plotted to kill a king
Yeah.
in it, so you know
And I
who's
know
sleeping
everything.
where.
Yeah.
Now
I know
all of a
everyone is.
sudden, a very analytical way of looking at a scene like this and counting syllables and that kind of thing, when you turn it on its head and think, well, why isn't Shakespeare giving the character time to think here? Because she doesn't need it. Why doesn't she need time to think? Because she knows. Why does she know? Because she's the hostess, and it makes sense. So, go from I heard the owl scream and the crickets cry.
I heard the owl scream and the crickets cry. Did you speak?
When?
Now.
As I descended?
I...
Hark! Who lies in the second chamber?
Donalbain.
This is a sorry sight.
A foolish thought. I came as you
No, but you're absolutely right. Because after all of that, we now have the line, this is a sorry sight. And one of the wonderful things about Shakespeare is he never tells us what this is. So your this is going to be different from my this, different from his this, different from his this, because you decide with your own life experiences what the this might be. And you say this is a sorry sight, which is 6, which means you have a nice, as you took, a pause of 4 to go, oh my God, this is a sorry sight, or this is a sorry sight.
Yeah.
And then you reprimand him, a foolish thought to say a sorry sight. Why don't you put all of that together from the top?
Okay. I have done the deed. Dost thou not hear a noise?
I heard the owl scream and the crickets cry. Did you not speak?
When?
Now.
As I descended?
Aye.
Hark! Who lies his second chamber?
Donalbain.
Oh, this is a sorry sight.
Foolish thought to say a sorry sight.
That's good. Give him a round of applause. And there's the scene. And because I'm a very kind person, I've marked out the syllable count on the left there. That's what those numbers are. But look at this staggered effect. It isn't in the original editions, folio or whatnot, because they didn't have the space. And this is, of course, my setting of it, and you could argue that hark can come straight after I. You know, I mean, there's all sorts of different ways of putting this scene together. This is, from my experience, the most dramatic way of putting it together. But look how different it is from that. By this point in Shakespeare's career, he is improvising with this pentameter like he is Miles Davis on the trumpet. Di-dum, 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 di-dum. Di-dum, 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 di-dum. Di. Di. Di-dum, 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 di-dum. Like any good musician, he keeps returning to the melody and then playing above and beyond and around it, creating interruptions and overlap and the natural kind of non-fluency. This is why Shakespeare is beautiful. It's not beautiful because we should be declaiming it like poetry. It's beautiful because it's human. It's as human as he could make it. There's one bit I'd like to show you before I skip on to the bright bit of the talk. And I haven't actually explored this in public before. I've written about it in a series of books I wrote called Springboard Shakespeare. And there's two things I want to share with you that I found someone referring to in a book 50 years ago, and I've started to explore with my company. Aslam, Jen, can you come back and duck down here with me? We're going to read a little bit of the end of Hamlet. This is the grave scene with Ophelia. And you'll notice, if I can get the right button, there we go. You see these little things here? These are the missing beats. These are the lines that have less than 10 syllables in them and that we'll pause to try and make sense of.
Now pile your dust upon the quick and dead, till of this flat a mountain you have made, to o'ertop old Pelion, or the skyish head of blue Olympus.
What is he whose grief spares such an emphasis, whose phrase of sorrow conjure the wandering stars and makes them stand like wander-wounded hearers? This is I, Hamlet the Dane.
The devil take thy soul.
Thou prayest not well. I prithee, take thy fingers from my throat. Sir, though I am not splenitive and rash, yet have I something in me dangerous, which let thy wiseness fear. Away thy hand.
Pluck them asunder.
Hamlet, Hamlet.
Gentlemen! Good my lord, be quiet.
Why, I will fight with him upon this theme until my eyelids will no longer wag.
Oh, my son, what theme?
I loved Ophelia. 40,000 brothers could not, with all their quantity of love, make up my sum. What wilt thou do for her?
Oh, he is mad, Laertes.
For the love of God, forbear him.
Come, show me what thou do. Would weep, would fight, would tear thyself, would drink up Isel, eat a crocodile? I'll do it. Dost thou come here to whine, to outface me with leaping in her grave? When we were exploring this a couple of years ago. I was asked to go over to Reno, Nevada, to be an artist in residence at the university there, and to help put together and lead the first contemporary production of Hamlet in original pronunciation, which I am coming to. And we struggled putting this scene together because of all these pauses and these interruptions. And what I've been discovering of late is that Shakespeare, not content with getting his characters and actors to come in on cue with each other, is, it turns out, I think, that they got them to overlap with each other. So that the idea of Shakespeare being beautiful poetry that every syllable should be heard, there's a very good chance it wasn't the case 400 years ago. Whose phrase of sorrow conjure the wandering stars and make them stand like wonder-wounded heroes. This is I, Hamlet the Dane.
The devil take thy soul.
Thou prayest not well.
Pluck them asunder.
Gentlemen, I prithee take thy fingers from my throat. Sir, thou I am not splenitive and rash.
Hamlet,
Yet have I something in me dangerous,
Good,
which
my
let thy
lord, be
wiseness
quiet.
fear away thy hand. Why, I will fight with him upon this theme until
my
my
son,
eyelids
what
will no
theme?
longer wag. I love Ophelia. 40,000 brothers could not, with all their quantity of love, make up my sum. What wilt thou do for her? Come, show me what thou do.
Oh,
Would
he
weep,
is
would
mad,
fight, would tear
Laertes.
thyself, would drink up Isle, eat a crocodile? I'll do it.
For the love
Just
of
thou
God,
come here
forbear
to
him.
whine, to outface me with leaping in her grave. As with so many of these things, as I spend my spare time trying to explore new ways of acting Shakespeare, it's just an idea, but I do like it. And one more from King Lear, and for this I'm going to have to ask a random member of the audience to help me. Sir, have we ever met before? No. Ladies and gentlemen, my father, David Crystal.
This is a sorry sight.
Foolish thought to say a sorry. Do you come here often, Dad? Do you want to do Lear? I'll do Kent. I think it's the right way round.
Just about. This is a dull sight. Are you not Kent?
The same, your servant Kent. Where is your servant Caius?
He's a good fellow, I can tell you that. He'll strike, and quickly too. He's dead and rotten.
No, my good lord, I am the very man.
I'll see that straight.
That from your first of difference and decay have followed your sad steps.
You are welcome hither.
Nor no man else, all's cheerless, dark, and deadly. And it, it doesn't work too badly, but notice it's not just the gaps here. The verse is a little bit, it's spilling over. There's lots of plus, extra syllables in the line. Using the same process. So, Dad, you're going to come in on these two when you hit the stars. You see them?
Yeah, gotcha.
So you start.
This is a dull sight. Are you not
The
Kent?
same, your servant Kent.
He's
Where
a
is your
good
servant-
fellow like...
Oops,
sorry.
That's all right. So wait until I've asked, where's your servant Caius?
Oh, okay.
Okay, go again.
This is a dull sight. Are you not
The
Kent?
same, your servant Kent. Where is your servant Caius?
He's a good fellow, I can tell you that. He'll strike, and quickly too. He's dead and rotten.
No, my good lord, I am the very man
I'll
that
see
from
that
your first
straight.
difference and decay have followed your sad steps. Nor
You are
no
welcome
man
hither.
else. Round of applause. Thank you. It's interesting, because I've been working on Pericles a lot in this last month, and there are times when, in the modern editions, they try to order or reorder the poetry that is in prose-ish form back into better metrical poetry and even out all the lines into 10, 10, 10, and 10. And actually what we find is that Pericles, a much, much later play that was co-written. And a lot of people say, oh, the early verse is very bad. Well, what if it's even more avant-garde than what we first thought? That there are elements, if you start with prose and then you move up to poetry and then rhyming poetry and then sonnet and song, what if there's this lovely space in between prose and poetry where the poetry looks prose-ish or the prose has a poetic quality to it? And that, I think, is something that perhaps might be going on at the end of Lear here, and definitely seems to be going on at points in Pericles. This is why I think Shakespeare is beautiful, because he tells me so much on how I should perform him, or how I should guide others to perform him. It's been thought for so long that Shakespeare is beautiful because he writes such beautiful poetry, and thereby the idea that we should speak him with a beautiful poetic voice too. And again, thanks to the work that my father started at the Shakespeare's Globe in 2004, I know now that this is not the case. Someone asked, in fact, Melissa mentioned at the beginning, I have 18 accents. Well, for those of you, I mean, you've been listening to my accent for long enough. My accent is a very weird and special beast. If I think about it, I was born in Ascot, which is just outside of London, just to the west. Yep, west. Then when I was 7, I moved up to Holyhead, you know, and when I go home, I start talking a bit more like that, you know. I've got a Welsh accent deep inside me, in my heart. And then, you know, soon after that, I went up to Lancaster to university, so I've got the short A in my voice too. And then, you know, came down to London, because of course that's where the work is, right? And so I've got a bit of, you know, if you've probably heard the more astute among you, I've got a bit of the glottal stop, you know, so it's glottal instead of glottal. And you know, I do flap my T's an awful lot, and I also flap my T's a lot because I got a lot of American friends, and I go over to the States a lot, and so I've got that kind of transatlantic sort of, you know, thing going on as well. So my accent is a combination of all of those things, and it's a very useful thing to have, and I'll come back to exactly why in a moment. Shakespeare's accent, though. Well, I mean, Shakespeare's accent is very far away from what we think it to be. And indeed, the Shakespeare's Globe asked Dad to find out what this sound might be. And we've called this sound original pronunciation. And without any further ado, I'll let you hear what it sounds like. But by comparison, I will first give a little bit of a speech in received pronunciation. Now, received pronunciation is, in America, you know, you call it good American, I think is the accent. Over here we have received pronunciation, and it is the accent that we are still told in drama schools today, that if you don't speak it, you cannot and will not be hired to perform Shakespeare. Ironically, when I auditioned for the Shakespeare's Globe just under 10 years ago now, in my audition I came and I gave my speech in my great received pronunciation, and the director looked at me and went, "Where are you from?" And I went, I grew up in Wales. And she said, "Do it in your Welsh accent." I did it in my Welsh accent. I got the job. And did every single show in that accent too. So it just goes to show, I suppose. What was I talking about? Oh, yeah. So the speech in received pronunciation and then in original pronunciation. And when I do the original pronunciation, I'd love to hear, both from the people in the room and abroad, you're going to hear all sorts of different things. I'd love to hear what accents it reminds you of. And I will exaggerate both accents a little bit for the effect. The opening of Romeo and Juliet. Two households, both alike in dignity, in fair Verona where we lay our scene. From ancient grudge break to new mutiny, where civil blood lays civil hands unclean. From forth the fatal lines of these two foes, a pair of star-crossed lovers take their life, whose misadventured piteous overthrows doth with their death bury their parents' strife. Same speech, and this is as close as we can get to what Shakespeare's accent would have sounded like, and the accent of his actors. Two households, both alike in dignity, in fair Verona where we lay our sin. From ancient grudge break to new mutiny, where civil blood lays civil hands unclean. From forth the fatal lines of theirs two foes, a pair of star-crossed lovers take the life, whose misadventured piteous overthrows doth with their death bury their parents' strife. It's cool, isn't it? I know. What accents does it remind you of? West Country. Scotland, Ireland, yeah. Archers. The Archers is a radio show. It doesn't matter, I'll explain to you later. I'm explaining to the rest of the world. Yeah, other accents. American, yep. Pirate. You know, I go into... No, you see, I go into schools about once a month over here and in Europe, and wherever I go, whatever age, whether it's 8 years old or 18 years old, and I say, what accent does it remind you of? And someone goes, Pirates of the Caribbean! Ha! Yes, indeed. No, it's true, though, and there's a reason for that, too. But yeah, other accents. Oxfordshire, yeah. There's a theme here. Say the accent you don't want to say because you think you'd be wrong. Midland, yeah. You didn't? Two old souls, both alike in dignity and fair Verona, where we hear saying from ancient. I've had people say Canadian. I've had people say Australian. You're all right. Shakespeare's London was a melting pot of accents. People would come from Norwich and Wales and Scotland and Ireland and the Midlands and Somerset and pirate country. And they'd come to London and their accents would all mix in together. And then, of course, later on, they'd go to Bristol and sail across to America. And later still, they'd be sent to Bristol and go down to Australia. And that's, in part, where those accents all come from. Notice what it did to me? Two households, both alike in dignity and fair Verona, where we lay under, and come sort of slightly restricted here. Two households, I'm exaggerating it, of course. Two households, both alike in dignity. I've hunkered down. My centre, as actors would say, has shifted from something like up here to much more earthier down here, maybe even lower. I'm keeping it clean. We're at the British Council. I'm not going to keep it that clean, don't worry. My voice has dropped even further too. Two households. A deeper resonance has been engaged, a very useful resonance when you're outside in a theatre like, I don't know, let's say the Globe. It's faster too, eh? Two households, both alike in dignity. Two households, both alike in dignity. When they did the first original pronunciation experiment of the Globe, they were scared that people wouldn't understand it, and so they did most of the production in received pronunciation and 3 performances over a weekend in original pronunciation. Now, they, of course, did the scene that you saw Aslam and Jenny act, which is Romeo and Juliet meeting at a dance, and the director had choreographed the dance and the sonnet perfectly, and when they finished dancing, they finished speaking, and it was great. And then they did it in original pronunciation. And they were speaking so much faster, they got to the end of the sonnet, but they had still about a minute left of dancing with nothing left to say. No, we can't high five. The original pronunciation production was 10 minutes faster. Which could, you could understand then, as the chorus says, is now the 2 hours traffic of our stage. It's more achievable, perhaps. Definitely not the 3 3/4 hours traffic of our stage, as many Shakespeare productions have grown to. All very well and good and interesting, I hear you say, but what use is it? Well, it turns out it's of great use and of fascinating use, that these bright and beautiful words are even brighter and more beautiful than first we thought. There's a great example of something that is eternally missed in the accent that we are told that we have to speak Shakespeare in, from As You Like It. As You Like It, the play of a good duke and an evil duke brother. And the evil duke brother sends his good duke and his men off into the forest of Arden. His merry men, a bit Robin Hoody. And one of the merry men is not so merry, the melancholic Jacques, maybe you want to say his name. And Jacques comes back from the forest, from wandering in the forest, and he's smiling, which is unusual. And the Duke says to him, Jacques, why, Jacques, why are you smiling? And Jacques says, how do you say his name? Says, a fool, I met a fool i' th' forest. As I do live by food, I met a fool who laid him down and basked him in the sun and railed on Lady Fortune in good terms, in good set terms, and yet a motley fool. Motley is the patchwork quality colour that the fools would wear. Good morrow, fool, quoth I. No, sir, quoth he, call me not fool till heaven hath sent me fortune. He's begging. And then he drew a dial from his poke, a watch from his pocket, and looking on it with lackluster eye, says very wisely, it is 10 o'clock. Thus you may see, quoth he, how the world wags. 'Tis but an hour ago since it was 9. After 1 hour more, 'twill be 11. And so from hour to hour we ripe, and from hour to hour we rot, and thereby hangs a tale. When I did hear the motley fool thus moral on the time, my lungs began to crow like Chanticleer, that fools should be so deep contemplative, and I did laugh. Son's intermission, an hour by his dial. And then he drew a dial from his pocket, and looking on it with lackluster eye, says very wisely, it is 10 o'clock. Thus we may see, quoth he, how the world wags. 'Tis but an hour ago since it were 9. After 1 hour more, 'twill be 11. And so from hour to hour we ripe, and from hour to hour we rot, and thereby hangs a tale. That's the joke. When I did hear the motley fool thus moral on the time, my lungs began to crow like Chanticleer. He said he laughed so hard, he made a sound like Chanticleer. Now Chanticleer is the cockerel from the Nun's Priest's Tale, Chaucer's Nonnes Priest's Tale. All Elizabethans would know it well. Chanticleer had the most beautiful in all the land. That's the noise that Jacques made. And I did laugh, he says, sans intermission, without a break, an hour by his dial. Why? It's not funny. Then we looked at it in OP. And in original pronunciation, in Shakespeare's time, the word hour was pronounced or. Say it with me. Or. Sounds good, doesn't it? The word for prostitute, whore, was also pronounced or. Hour, or, whore, or. A fool, I met a fool at forest, as I do live by foot. I met a fool who laid him down and basked him in the sun, and railed on Lady Fortune in good terms, in good set terms, and yet a motley fool. Good morrow, fool, quoth I. No, sir, quoth he, call me not fool till 11 hath sent me fortune. And then he drew a dial from his poke, and looking on it with lackluster eyes, says very wisely, it is 10 o'clock. Thus you may say, quoth her, how the world wags. 'Tis but an hour ago since it were 9. And after on or more, 'twill be 11. And so from or to or we ripe and ripe. Told you it was going to get dirtier. And then from or to or we rot, and thereby hangs a tale. Yeah, it's a really rude sex joke. With my mother in the front row. You know, if I have a bugbear about modern Shakespeare, it's that because people think that it's just easy to perform, that all you have to do is stand on stage and sound beautiful, they don't know how much direction Shakespeare has given you within the writing styles that he's written. And because it's full of 400-year-old jokes, that some of which really don't make sense anymore, the temptation is to fill outside of the lines with bum jokes and sex jokes and toilet humor that isn't there. And then the toilet humor that is there is missed because we're saying it in the wrong accent. The last time I saw this performed, the actor came to the front of the stage and said, so from hour to hour we ripe, and from hour to hour we rot, and thereby hangs a tale. Anyway, it doesn't work anymore. The idea of original pronunciation is not that every play, Forever Hear More, should be performed in original pronunciation. But there are things that we can learn from it in exactly the same way as we can learn from the original texts. We can learn from, as original, a theatrical dynamic like the Globe. And as I'm experimenting with, we can learn from the kind of company dynamic of keeping the same group of actors together and having them repeat their work and their work with each other with the same master's voice. I love working in original pronunciation. There's a wonderful speech that you all know. The beginning of Richard III. Now is the winter of our discontent. made glorious summer by this sun of York, and all the clouds that lowered upon our house in the deep bosom of the ocean buried. Now our brows bound with victorious wreaths, our bruised arms hung up for monuments, our stern alarums changed to merry meetings, our dreadful marches to delightful measures. Grim-visaged war hath smoothed his wrinkled front, and now, instead of mounting barbed steeds to fright the souls of fearful adversaries, he capers nimbly in a lady's chamber to the lascivious pleasing of a lute. But I, that am not shaped for sportive tricks, nor made to court an amorous looking-glass, I, that am rudely stamped and want love's majesty to strut before a wanton ambling nymph, I, that am curtailed of this fair proportion, cheated of feature by dissembling nature, deformed and finished, sent before my time into this breathing world scarce half made up, and that so lamely and unfashionable that dogs bark at me as I halt by them. Why, I, in this weak piping time of peace, have no delight to pass away the time, unless to see my shadow in the sun and descant on mine own deformity. It's this line that I want you to look at. Cheated of feature by dissembling nature. In fact, that line. Yeah, I can do PowerPoint, it turns out. Who knew? Listen to what happens to that line, which some could argue, cheated of feature by dissembling nature, some could argue is the most important line in the speech, because it is, of course, Richard talking about his own limitations, whatever they may be. No is the winter of our discontent made glorious summer by this sun of York, and how the clouds that lowered upon our house in the deep bosom of the ocean buried. No, our brows bound with victorious wreaths, our bruised arms hung up for monuments, our stern alarums changed to merry maidens, our dreadful marches to delightful measures. Grim-visaged war hath smoothed his wrinkled front, and now, instead of mounting barbed steeds to fright the souls of fearful adversaries, it capers nimbly in a lady's chamber to the lascivious pleasing of a lute. But I, that am not shaped for sportive tricks, nor made to court an amorous looking-glass, I, that am rudely stamped and want love's majesty to strut before a wanton ambling nymph, I, that am curtailed of this fair proportion, cheated of fate by dissembling nature, deformed and finished, sent before my time into this breathing world scarce half made up, and that so lamely and unfashionable that dogs bark at me as I halt by them, why I, in this white peeping time apace, have no delight to pass away the time, unless to see my shadow in the sun and descant on mine own deformity. Did you hear it? Not cheated of feature by dissembling nature. I, that am curtailed of this fair proportion, cheated of fate by dissembling nature. Not di-dum, 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 di-dum. Da, 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 cheated of fate by dissembling nature. Somehow, in this accent, in this speech, Shakespeare makes the iambic pentameter canter for Richard. It's beautiful. There are legion ways to introduce people to Shakespeare. In fact, Greg Doran, the artistic director of the Royal Shakespeare Company, just this very week, called for kids as young as 8 to be introduced to Shakespeare, and I couldn't agree more wholeheartedly. As I said at the beginning, I am very, very lucky to get to teach and act and workshop this man's works. I'm asked sometimes when I go into schools and I'm faced with the same problem, more or less. One problem over here on these shores. Kids hate Shakespeare. The problem when on my travels around the world have been not an antipathy towards Shakespeare. If anything, there's a greater love for him, maybe because they don't have the burden or the onus of him being part of our cultural heritage. No, the students that I meet in America and India, around Europe, they love him, but they don't feel like they can do him properly because they don't have the right accent. I was giving a talk in Somerset, one of the very few dry bits left of it, unfortunately, last weekend, and someone said, well, what would you do? I said, I'll tell you exactly what I'd do. The very first time I was introduced to Shakespeare, I was told to study him, and then I was examined on him. I was 14 years old. What would happen if we introduced our teenagers, our younglings, to Shakespeare from an actor's point of view, with the manual that Shakespeare wrote on how to perform them? If we had, not all schools can afford this, but we have had actors come in, or drama departments, they get their first slice of the Shakespearean cake. By the time you're 16, you're skilled in recognizing Shakespeare's voice. You're skilled, perhaps, in speaking it and understanding what it means to say, aye, but to die and go we know not where. To actually think the thought, to be or not to be, that is the question. And then you can choose to study him at A level in a literary critical manner. How wonderful. How full of joy would the literature teachers be? How full of joy might the kids be? These are really, really wonderful works. Like I say, I'm very lucky. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Steve Roberts. I'm Director of Charitable Activities for the English-Speaking Union. We're delighted to be partnering with the British Council on these English Language Council lecture series, and I can't do it either, Melissa. But we at the English-Speaking Union regard the English Language Council as one of the jewels in our crown, and that was a diamond, Ben. Thank you very much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And you'll be pleased to know, as part of Shakespeare Week next month, the English-Speaking Union are working with primary schools in Birmingham, Liverpool and London on workshops and things like that.
I'm an ambassador for Shakespeare Week.
Charlie, talk to him later. We will move straight to questions from the audience. There is one phrase I do not want to hear. I've got two questions. You're allowed one question, and that is all that you're allowed. Can we have a question for Ben, please? All right, Ben. Oh, sorry, I'm not looking.
Microphone.
Hang on. There you go.
You described when you were you moved into original speech, the way your body changed and your tone changed. Would Shakespeare have expected a different tone and a different body stance for what we describe as more heroic characters, for his king characters and his queen characters? Would they have sounded different from his mechanicals and the different types of characters in plays?
Absolutely. Everybody hear the question okay? Yeah. It's something that was asked a lot in the first experiments, and something that we toyed around with Hamlet too. I mean, there are two things. One is the physical and one is the sound. You know, if everybody is sounding the same, if everybody's using the same accent, how can you tell king from commoner? Well, the king wears a crown and everybody falls to their knees when he walks in. Kingship is bestowed upon. You act, in other words. The physicality that you saw, and you saw better than everybody else. My old hunch comes in and that kind of thing. You know, I'm sort of not ramrod straight. It's an interesting thing that we've noticed happens throughout. Whoever acts Shakespeare in OP, male or female, their voices tend to drop a little bit. Their lower register engages, and they become more active, more physical. And it is apparently, as some people in the room will back me up on, a linguistic phenomenon in that the shifting of the vowels engages different aspects of your tongue and your lips and your mouth, and the effect travels down. The cool thing about that is, well, what is it? The fact that if there is no restriction here, then there is more solid flow from here to here. I mentioned earlier my mongrel accent. Everything we know about original pronunciation, or how they sounded, the way they sounded, gets us to about 90% accurate. And there's this gaping hole of a 10%, which is frustrating in some respects, but it's, 90% isn't bad. What's been interesting as I travel around the world and as I explore original pronunciation with different people and different natural accents, is that their OP, like Aslam has learned original pronunciation, and Aslam is much more of a mongrel than I am. He's from all over the place. But the great thing is that rather than us all learn receive pronunciation and our accents flatten out and we sound all kind of homogeneous and uniform, the great thing is that your OP would be different from your OP, would be different from yours, would be different from yours, because you've all would learn the 90% and then fill that last 10% with your cultural background and your life background and your cultural life experiences and so on and so forth. And so all of a sudden we're starting to talk about speaking Shakespeare in a very personal way because of the physical engagement, because of that sort of accent of the home. You listen, you speak more with the heart. The audience, as you've all said, you all heard different accents in the original pronunciation. I bet a lot of you heard the accent that is closest to your home. It's an interesting, fascinating, the ramifications it has both on the body and the ear. I love it.
I'm going to do my Eurovision Song Contest moment here now. I've got a question from Vasso in Greece. For someone who's just started getting familiar with Shakespeare, which of his works would you suggest reading first? Although you'd probably suggest performing first, wouldn't you?
Yeah. I would definitely go. Absolutely. These things, reading a Shakespeare play is something that I've only recently, after 10 or 15 years, become good at. Reading a Shakespeare play is like someone giving you a Ferrari and then saying, no, you can't drive it. Here are the keys. You can't have those. But you can have the engine manual, which you're welcome to read. Can I not drive the car? No, you can't. You can't drive the car, but you can read about it. The only people that were supposed to read these plays were Shakespeare's actors. 80% of the Elizabethans couldn't read. Don't read. Go and see. Or read Shakespeare on toast. This is good too. And then go and see.
But give Vassal a help. Which ones would
Vassal, I would aim for something, one of the, maybe Midsummer Night's Dream. That's a really nice one. It's Midsummer Night's Dream. You know, the reason why I try and teach these techniques from as young as possible is because it's a good crowbar. If you flip open any Shakespeare play and see that kind of staggered effect that I showed you in Macbeth, you know immediately something is going on between those characters. They have a relationship of some sort. They are speaking quickly with each other. Why are they speaking quickly with each other? Are they passionate? Are they in love? Are they in a hurry? Are they angry with each other? If there's a line with less than 10 syllables, you know that the character's been given time to think. These are the little crowbars that will hopefully break open any work. So, you know, and the good thing is that when you're flicking through what looks to be dense poetry, if you can find one chink in the armor, that's all you really need. But a good one full of lots of delicious things like that is Midsummer Night's Dream.
We'll take another one from one of our friends, this friend in Algeria, before I come back to the audience here. What do you think would happen in the world of literature if Shakespeare was amongst us today?
I don't know. He's a playwright. I mean, you know, this is a bugbear of mine. What would happen to the world of literature if Shakespeare were alive today? You know, God help me, he'd either be writing for EastEnders or he'd be writing the next Bond novel. I really, I don't know. I would hope. I mean, you know, because this is the extraordinary thing, and this is in part the reason why people say there's a conspiracy theory about him. He is unparalleled. He is a genius, and that's really hard to relate to, and it makes us doubt the provenance of the works. But there hasn't been anybody like him since. There have been great playwrights. Pinter's brilliant. Beckett, wonderful. Simon Stevens, amazing. Miller, terrific. Great artists in prose. Dickens, Austen. There are wonderful poets. Simon Armitage, Carol Ann Duffy, Wordsworth, I mean, goodness. There are great lyricists and songwriters. Shakespeare did it all whilst mastering an ensemble, running a theatre, having a better understanding of a theatrical and an audience dynamic than anybody I've seen, and bringing up a couple of kids. I mean, well, no, he didn't and did, but still. I mean, you know, I think he wouldn't just teach the world of literature a thing or two, he'd teach a lot of different worlds a thing or two. I'd just be interested in having a beer with him, to be honest.
I think we all would. Can I take another question from the audience, please? At the back here.
I'll just have one question, don't worry. I'm kind of amazed by your versatility, because when I've learned languages, you learn another language and you develop, feels like you're developing another part of yourself, like your soul is expressed through another form. So I feel it, you know, it must be incredible for you to be able to express your form in all those different ways. And I think the beauty of that is, you know, with the British Council tonight, and I think when you learn another language, you can understand another culture and be more human and be a global citizen. But it would be good to get, you know, your experience on that versatility you have.
Yeah. You know, I think the thing is about working with Shakespeare is every single day of my life he shows me something I didn't know about myself or about life. When I'm given the honor of working with people, for example, the British Council took me to India a few years ago, and I ended up working with about 20, 15 to 40-year-olds, most of whom had never done any Shakespeare before, one of whom had only just heard of Shakespeare, which was really interesting. Over the course of the week, because I was teaching them the ensemble method that I practice, and we were mounting a few scenes. Over the course of the week, every single one of them took me aside at one point, started talking to me about something in their life, started crying. It is such an honor to work with this guy, to see the effect, as he does indeed hold the mirror up to life to people, up to my own life. How, and then even more. You talk about language. I mean, you know, this is a language lecture after all. Let's talk about Macbeth. Let's talk about the fact that, you know, the two speeches that bookend this scene that I showed you. Macbeth comes out and says, if 'twere done when 'twere done, then 'twere well it were done quickly, if the assassination could trammel up the consequence and catch with his to see success. He comes out to the audience and says, do you think I should kill Duncan? And as he formulates the idea for the first time, as he speaks it out loud for the very first time, Shakespeare invents a new word: assassination. The word hashashan, assassin, existed. Assassination did not. It's the very first time Macbeth actually sort of manages to formulate the very word. He can't say murder. He brings a new one. It would have prickled the backs of everybody's necks. The very next speech, Macbeth, having now convinced himself, or at least his wife has convinced him, to go and kill Duncan, and he's on the way. And on his way, he thinks he sees something, and he talks to us, the audience, and he asks us, is this a dagger I see before me, the handle toward my hand? Come, let me clutch thee, I have thee not, and yet I see thee still. 55 miles away from the Shakespeare's Globe, a place that, when it wasn't being used as a theatre, was being used as a bear pit, where they would take a bear and attach it to a stake with a chain and bet on which dog would kill it first. A place that ran with blood, that had pickpockets and prostitutes coming through the audience every single day. People selling beer and getting drunk and shouting. A place that was outside of the city limits, a place where the practitioners were called rogues and vagabonds. And 50 miles away in Cambridge, in the university, the leading academics of the time were asking one question. They were asking, is it possible to create matter by the power of your mind? Cafe latte. A puppy. Dagger. They didn't know. They really, really didn't know. When Shakespeare writes Macbeth coming out and thinking he sees a dagger, he's not just hallucinating his fears. Shakespeare is dragging the leading academic question from the brightest minds in the country, and he is dragging it and presenting it to the commoners and making them think in a way that they just weren't used to. He makes me think in ways I'm not used to, and somehow makes everybody that touches him and comes near him think about themselves and think about life in ways they're not used to. It's amazing.
I'm going to run this a bit because, and you can wait for your drinks and your network. Take another question from the audience, please. Over there. I'll come to you.
Just one question, okay. Obviously, we can change the accents when acting Shakespeare. Can we which define the language? For example, instead of saying they, you, to help foreign students who learn the English language, to help them understand, the messages.
Can we change the language? Can we simplify it to encourage people, especially people whose second language is English, with Shakespeare? Yeah, absolutely. It's done all the time. Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet. I've got a bunch of manga Shakespeare at home. The most heartbreaking production of Pericles I ever saw at National Theatre was translated. Should we simplify the language? I'm not a big fan of some of the editions of Shakespeare that simplify it, because when they, let's simplify to be or not to be. That is the question. And we simplify to be or not to be. That is the question. To be or not to be. Well, let's simplify that to, shall I live or shall I die? Shall I live or shall I kill myself? That is one interpretation of that line. There are thousands more. Should we remove change thou and you to just you? Well, yeah, absolutely, because it essentially means the same. But, like I intimated earlier, we would be missing the beautiful little stage direction from Shakespeare, that you is formal, that thou is informal, that perhaps, Aslam, come in a second, that perhaps if I'm being formal with Aslam and I'm calling him you, and all of a sudden I switch and start calling him thou, am I being more serious with him? Am I perhaps closer to him on stage because I'm being more intimate using thou? Is the thou-you switch indicative of spacing on stage? Are we getting sort of blocking directions from Shakespeare now too? Yes, of course, thank you. Of course we could. He's brilliant at just standing. The meaningful standing there. Don't give him a round of applause. Don't bow. Oh, this is all good. Now look what you've done. So, I mean, we can do whatever we like with Shakespeare. There is no Shakespearean foundation like there is the Beckett Foundation stopping anybody from changing anything. The question is, should we? But the thing that does help, and it helps universally, is just to remove the idea that it should be spoken in a particular way. I mean, there are clues about coming in on cue, about speaking faster with each other, but there is no, I think the biggest thing that's helped me with international students is going, no, your voice is enough. Your life is more than enough to fill this role. And it was in that speech, Grim-visaged war, grim-visaged war. Right? It doesn't have to be an OP. You just have to fill those words with colour. Cry havoc and unleash the dogs of war. Cry havoc and unleash the dogs of war. Cry havoc and unleash the dog. Hello, I'm a dog of war. Enchanté. I would never, you know, get them to say it like they mean it, get them to say it in their own words, get them to say it with their voice. I got the pleasure of introducing some 13-year-olds to Shakespeare a year or so ago. I gave them the balcony scene from Romeo and Juliet. In 5 minutes, they turned it into a gay nightclub with Romeola and Julia. And there was a DJ, it was it was filthy, but they made it their own. And of course, you know, I mean, Romeo and Juliet, it's a play about a 13-year-old and a 15-year-old. I said to them, it's yours. You know, you have trouble introducing youngsters to Shakespeare, give them a play that was written for them. Why did Shakespeare write Romeo and Juliet as 13 and 15? Well, because they're not Beatrice and Benedict, and they're not Antony and Cleopatra. They're going through love for the first time, and a 13-year-old student can tell me more about what it's like to be 13 than I can tell them. So, you know, find a bit that resonates with them, and get them to speak it in their own voice. They'll be grand. You don't have to simplify it necessarily.
Noise is off. Can we take the question from there?
You've talked a lot about Macbeth and the meter. I was wondering if you could say a little bit about the witches, because that's one place he very deliberately goes trochaic instead of iambic.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a really cool thing. The witches in Macbeth, the fairies in Midsummer Night's Dream, they don't speak in iambic pentameter, they speak in iambic tetrameter. There are 4 beats to the line. Sometimes they even speak in what it would technically be called trochaic tetrameter. He's basically cutting a beat off and switching the rhythm around. God, it's clever, because of course if a de-dum, 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 de-dum rhythm, iambic pentameter, is the natural rhythm of normal humans, then anything that differs from that rhythm vastly and goes de-dum, 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 instead of de-dum, 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 or dum, de-dum, de-dum, then that sounds inhuman, ethereal, witch-like, magical, fairy, folky. It's a wonderful little trick. What's interesting about Macbeth and the witches is that Macbeth starts with the scene of witches and starts in that odd rhythm. And then the second scene is with humans. So you're immediately tuned into something inhuman, which then makes the arrival of humans sound odd? Dunno. But it's fascinating what he does with it.
I'm told we have one last question, which I'm going to take from overseas, I'm afraid. And I'm sorry to all of you overseas. I have a long list. Zanab in Bahrain, Alvi in Lithuania. I'm not quite sure where Alston is from, and I'll cut out all the Ben, you're the best thing since sliced bread stuff.
Alston.
Since you performed Hamlet in OP, did you discover any essential difference in how you felt about the character? In other words, did the differences shift the character's interior? Of
Hamlet?
Yes.
God, that's a good question. Damn you, Alston. I think this is my friend in New York. Did it change? Yeah. Because it changed the entire experience. Because, you know, I mean, you're playing Hamlet. It's the jewel in the crown for every actor. You've got to somehow make sense of not just to be or not to be, that is the question, but oh, that this too solid flesh would melt thorn, resolve itself into a dew. Oh, what a rogue and peasant slave am I. What a piece of work as a man. I must be cruel to be kind. Get thee to a nunnery. I mean, for God's sakes, every single word that he drops out of his mouth is framed in posterity. My friend, one of my actors who's here now, told me before I left I must learn to stand like a prince. And I started, you know, doing all of this and wearing shoes with heels a lot more. And then when I was rehearsing, I found myself, you know, reconnecting with my body again, because a prince will stand the way that a prince wants to stand, I suppose. Doesn't have to stand up tall, stiff and straight. A prince is a prince because he's a prince, you know. People will bow before him whether he's hunched over or not. What was interesting was that as we rehearsed, I was finding him blossoming in a way that I wasn't expecting, because the original pronunciation, because of that weird connection between the heart and the head, was flowing so fluidly. I found myself interpreting lines and scenes in ways that I'd never even considered before. For example, that encounter with Laertes at Ophelia's grave, I decided at one point that it is I, Hamlet the Dane, instead of, it is I, Hamlet the Dane, I will kill you, Laertes, which didn't ever seem right to me, although it's been done plenty of times before. You know, there's Laertes, and he's just dived into the grave with his sister, and he's beside himself. And of course, this is my kind of brother-in-law, and this was my future wife. And you know, hey, it's me, Hamlet the Dane. It's you know, it's okay. I'm here for you too, sort of thing. There were lots of times where I'd find myself making kind of emotionally driven choices that perhaps I hadn't considered when I'd spoken it in a more sort of beautiful accent. There is a very good example of that. You know, we've all probably heard Sonnet 116, right? At a wedding, because it's got the word marriage in it. Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments. Love is not love, which alters when alteration finds. And I've read that at a wedding too. You know, I had to stand up there while the happy couple were like, oh, he's talking about us. And I thought it was about a marriage too. And I read it in OP and I realized it wasn't. And first of all, you know, the rhyme works, which is nice. This be error and upon me proved. I never writ, nor no man ever loved. You know, it had to be, if this be error and upon me proved. I never writ, nor no man ever looved. And the only person to ever elongate that vowel of love was Elvis. And you know, there's a little. It's not a poem about marriage. It's a poem about love, about true love, about eternal love. And I didn't connect with that until I spoke it in OP. And in fact, there might even be that gag from before, because there's the line, "Love alters not with his brief hours and weeks." Love isn't about true love. Isn't about the physical. Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments. Love is not love which alters when it alteration finds, or bends with the remover to remove. Oh no, it is an ever fixed mark, which looks on tempests and is never shaken. 'Tis the star to every wandering bark, whose worth's unknown, although his height be taken. Love's not time's full, though rosy lips and checks within his bending sickle's compass come. Love alters not with his brave oars and wakes, but bears it out into the edge of dumb. This be errand upon me proved, I never read, nor no man e'er loved. Thank you.
On prosaic level, ladies and gentlemen, you can find literature on both our organisations outside. And there are members of staff from the British Council and from English Speaking Union here who would be delighted to talk to you. I imagine you're actually more interested in continuing the conversation over a glass of wine with Ben and his company.
Could I say, actually, that if there is anybody abroad that still had questions on the webcast, by all means tweet at me and I will endeavour to spend the next day or so answering them. So thank you for tuning in.
Ladies and gentlemen, Ben Crystal and company.